Morning. Welcome to the Texas Real Estate Show, and we're here to talk about everything real estate, whether it's in Texas or anywhere in the US. We want to be the information channel for everybody that's interested in real estate, and we've got some interesting points that we'd like to discuss this morning. Let's start to talk about this. There's been a lot of talk about going into a housing bubble, prices going down, prices going up, the inaffordability of housing. And we've got some articles this morning, and there's a guy called Robert Shiller who's out there who is we're going to show you a video, and he's had a Nobel Peace Prize back in 2013. He predicted the 2008 housing crisis. But before we get into our video, good morning, Kay. How are you today?
I am good. I got you to eat a croissant. So
you did?
I got you to, break your diet.
Yeah. My wife won't be very pleased with me, but there you go.
Oh, we'll mute that part.
Yeah.
No, just kidding.
But before we get started, please like, subscribe, and thumbs up, and turn on notifications. We do appreciate the support. But as I said, this is a guy called Robert Shiller. He brought out, he basically said there would be a housing depression in 2008. And he has said that we are going into a housing bubble, and he believes that the housing depression is going to be more in the south, this part. I don't particularly agree with a lot that he said because we haven't got enough houses in the market. But anyway, let's get going, Kay. Let's play the clip and see where it takes us.
First box of a bubble, rapidly increasing prices. Now let's move to the second box, price to income ratios. Throughout the country, affordability is plummeting. The price to income ratio measures how much a typical person earns and what percentage of that income they need to spend to afford a typical home. Breaking this down by region and using Miami as an example, you can see that affordability is far below historic levels. This means people are financially stretched to own a normal home, or there's a lot of speculation and outside money entering the market, expecting equity to continue rising. This is seen as typically unsustainable and is yet another piece of evidence that we may just be in a bubble. Now back to Shiller for a second. He's recently gone on record to say that prices are getting out of control. In an interview with CNBC last March, he told the audience that clearly they should consider waiting to buy as prices would likely cool off. So far, he's been wrong, but that doesn't really change his rationale. You can hear him talk about it in this clip. While nobody, including this renowned economist, is going to tell you not to buy just because housing is such a big family decision that's way more than just purely financial, it doesn't change the fact that we're currently living in an era far above historical norms. Take a listen to him explain.
25 basis points at its last meeting, despite the recent bank failures of SVB and Signature. And as borrowing costs rise, what will the ripple effect be on residential and commercial real estate? Joining us now, Yale Professor of Economics, Robert Shiller. Professor, we're so happy to have you on the show today. We're going to get a bevy of housing data this week, including Case-Shiller Home Price Index tomorrow. We have this brewing debate about whether we've seen a bottom or even at least a stabilization in the housing market. How do you see it?
Well, it's easy to forecast the short run in the housing market. Not so easy to forecast if you're a long-term buyer. It's not clear. But home prices are very, very high, and by historical standards, I would extrapolate the downturn somewhat. It's going to continue. Maybe if you have a chance to delay your purchase, it might be a good time to do it.
Robert, I want to go back to housing for a moment. How does this affordability standoff that we see in residential real estate end? I mean, we've got extremely low inventory, high interest rates. Is it going to take higher unemployment to break landlords' ability to increase rents? And from there, the investments don't pencil out anymore, and therefore they got to dump them, and inventory rises and prices drop, or something else?
Yeah. Well, that's the capitalist system with a central bank. I think it works pretty well most of the time. I wouldn't tinker too much with it. we have smart people on the Fed, and the Treasury Secretary I admire, Janet Yellen. They may have to accept, however, I think this is as Jerome Powell has put it, they may have to accept something of a recession.
But for the housing market, how should the people at home who are maybe thinking about selling a home, you kind of addressed thinking about buying a home, how should they expect this to play out? If you have a chance to sell your house now, even if it's for a little less than you wanted, do you go ahead and do it because higher inventories are inevitably coming?
I wouldn't say inevitably. I would say that it's likely to be some more declines. So, but I hate to, home purchase is such a family decision. I hate to overreact. So we do have a declining market at the moment. But, there are costs to not selling at the right time, at a convenient time, or you might lose a house that you liked to somebody else. So I don't think it's an easy answer to that question.
When these price to income ratios go beyond historical norms, rapid norm.
Okay, let's sort of break that down. First of all, when they was talking about Miami, I think Miami, you can't compare Miami to the likes of Houston. It's fairly based on, location. Here in Houston, when we had the recession in 2008, the prices dropped maybe 10%. It wasn't really, a great deal. We didn't get many foreclosures like, a lot of other areas like, Detroit and a lot of it up in the Northeast. But, I do believe about, the rentals. I think that there's a lot of landlords out there that are trying to raise the rent $300 a month, and I don't think that's working too well. I really think they, need to be a little bit more sufficient. I try to keep my tenants in the properties for as long as I can. I do increase the rents maybe, $50 a year or whatever, but gradually it adds up, and gradually it makes a little bit of sense. But I don't know how you can compare Florida, especially with Texas, because Texas has a strong house market. And like we've said before, if the rate goes up, then you've got less buyers that are looking for the houses. If the rates come down, all of a sudden you've got 50 people that want to buy your house.
Yeah, and I think
because we just haven't got the inventory. I will say that I do think in Houston and the surrounding areas, not so much the rural areas, but I think the housing prices are flattened.
And that's what I was going to say. I think the problem that a lot of people see too is that we live in Houston. So we have a positive outlook on housing because houses are way cheaper here. Houston and San Antonio have the cheapest housing in Texas, and so we have that area. Obviously, Austin and Dallas, they are more expensive, but we have a different outlook, and we live here, so we see the research. Like Houston and San Antonio are probably the best places to move to if you want an affordable house, a big yard to be able to actually live. Like you said, you can't compare it to Miami because Miami's houses are expensive, so of course they're in a housing depression. Nashville, Tennessee, it used to be affordable, but then there was a boom just like Austin, so now it's not affordable to live in Nashville, and that's in the South as well. So some of these places experienced the huge California and Florida boom as well, and so it's really hard to compare that. So I think he's half right when he says the South, but he's not taking into account that there are places that are actually affordable as well, like Miami. That's like comparing Miami to Oklahoma.
And the and the other thing is, the property tax system in Florida is completely different to what it is in Texas.
Right.
It's more favorable in Texas. From an investor standpoint and from a homestead standpoint. So, I don't agree with him, to be perfectly honest. I don't mean to sound insulting towards him, especially as he's won a Nobel Peace Prize. But you know, to be perfectly honest, I really don't agree with him. I don't think there's going to be a depression at all. I think if it's a family decision, there's never a better time to buy a house or buy an investment property. But I think where it gets difficult for people is, especially investors, they want to buy an investment property and then for it to cash flow straight away. That sometimes is a very, very difficult task to take on. You know, it takes a bit of time. It takes 2 to 3 years. The properties that I've got and had in the past, you know, I'm lucky if I break even for 2 or 3 years, but gradually as it increases, then I get into a position where I'm starting to make money. Because what I'm doing is increasing my equity in the building, and at the same time, the rents are going up. So.
And I think like part of this also is, you know, people come from investor standpoints. They're not coming from, you know, someone like a regular person like me, right, who just wants to live into a house and stay in that house, you know, like want to own just that house. I don't want to invest in the house and, you know, keep purchasing 20, 30 houses. So it's like the housing depression, quote unquote, is not going to affect, you know, someone who, you know, people who are trying to just have their houses and live in them. It might affect investors and things like that, but yeah, it's very, very different. So yeah.
So, should we get on to our second video?
Yeah.
So the next point is a follow-up, and it's a follow-up from a video that we did from a fellow YouTuber who basically somebody built a house on some stolen land, and he went to visit the property and found out that somebody had basically built a $1.4 million home on the property. But what had happened was a doctor owned the property, and somebody had wrote his own deed and transferred the name over to him, and this person that basically stole the property was from South Africa, and basically sold the property to a developer. So, and I suggest to anybody that's interested in real estate, this channel is really good. It's called Leto's Law, and I would highly recommend that you subscribe to his channel. He has some really good information. I watch him pretty often, so why don't you roll the clip, Kay?
To Leto's Law. Here's Steve Leto.
Sarah sent me a note and said, Steve, check out this, an update to a story you did not so long ago. Remember the story about the guy who went to visit his property and discovered someone built a house on it? And he lived a distance away, and somebody went and built a house on his property. And you found out later that the developer who built the house bought the property from a guy claiming to be the true owner, but was not. So here's the update from CTinsider.com. Dan Haar wrote this. A resolution in battle over $1.5 million Connecticut home at heart of shocking real estate scam. In the end, a 4-bedroom house on Skytop Terrace in Fairfield, contested last year after a fraudulent land sale, sold to the same couple who agreed to buy it from the start. So it appears that they've resolved the issue. And Dan Haar points out it kind of ended with a whimper because there was just a real estate closing that was recorded a while back. So the story behind the newly built house sent shockwaves through the real estate industry, the legal community, and people everywhere who follow the land deals. It became the poster property for a rising type of scam known as seller impersonation fraud. Now, the house sold for $1.45 million at its closing price from a New Haven couple 1 year after the owner of the half-acre lot filed a lawsuit over it. That owner is a doctor from Long Island. He'd come back to Fairfield in the spring of 2023 to find a house built on land his family had owned for more than 70 years, and he had not sold it. Unbeknownst to him, a person with forged papers claiming to be him had sold the lot for $350,000 to a developer. So it became a nightmare because the owner of the property had to sue the lawyer in that land sale, along with the builders, who are a local partnership, and he sought $2 million in damages in a federal lawsuit, and he had asked for the house to be demolished because somebody went and put a house on his property. So the builders were a local team. They, in turn, sued a bunch of other people, including the real estate company and the agent that listed the land for sale back in 2022, because, of course, the listing was being made by somebody who didn't actually own the property. It seemed like a mess that could take years to unwind, but a settlement happened in the spring thanks to the judge, who earned high praise from the doctor, along with other parties to the case. Now, it's unclear because we don't know who got how much of what money, but the doctor did get paid. The partners who built the property, the developers, gained a clean title to the land, which allowed them to finish the house and make the sale. Now, there is a criminal investigation into the scammer who claimed to be the doctor, who had a South African address. Good luck with that. There's no resolution there. The local police turned that case over to the FBI, who are still working on it and have nothing to say about it. Several lawyers and parties to the cases called the settlement fair, and just as important, the doctor and some other people here are working to make sure that we don't see more cases like this one. So one of the attorneys said, I'm trying to teach other lawyers about this so it doesn't happen anymore. I'm a textbook case. So he spoke on a webinar with a title insurance company several weeks ago. He also addressed participants in the Connecticut Bar Association's continuing education program. Now, the doctor did a podcast with AARP as a victim of seller impersonation fraud. His message, as he described it to me, is if you live in California and you have land in Vermont, you'd better have somebody keeping an eye on it. Millions of people followed the story. Later accounts in the media about the scam that led to a heightened awareness of seller impersonation frauds at a time when title issuers, town clerks, and others were already trying to get the word out. The level of vigilance has increased as a result of this case. So lawyers will be more careful in the future, said a lawyer who brought the lawsuit on behalf of the doctor. Vigilance aside, this case had to be adjudicated, and that was not an easy task with a house built on property wrongly acquired. By several accounts, the judge did a masterful job of keeping the parties to the case and insurance carriers on track. So the doctor is now 71 years old. He grew up in a house next door to the parcel. His parents bought the land when he was a baby, and he later inherited it, hoping to pass it on to his children or grandchildren as a connection to the original family home, which has long since been sold. A settlement saving the house seemed likely because destroying an asset worth upwards of $1 million, which is the structure, would not make sense, according to this author. But we all know the law can and sometimes does clash with economic logic. And so Sarah, who sent me the story, said, Steve, I noticed that one sentence there saying that the odds that a house being torn down are slim because it, quote unquote, doesn't make sense. And that's an interesting point because, as Sarah notes, and I agree, it might not make sense, but a legal remedy that's allowed by law sometimes does make sense when you stop and look at the big picture. So if we were to say, oh, you build a house on someone else's property, but we won't tear it down, guess what? The idea of the house being torn down is the disincentive for someone to do this. Now, I understand.
So
I totally agree with that.
yeah.
To me, it's like, because they had no business building on the house in the first place, and I don't think the $1.4 million house, unfortunately involves a lot of attorneys, which is bringing the cost of things in. I don't see how the real estate company did anything wrong, because it's the title company that should be checking the title and the chain of title. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
The real estate company, their job is to basically work with everybody to get the deal closed. Unless they was doing anything fraudulent, then they deserve to be sued.
Exactly.
But basically, all the title companies have attorneys that work for them that should basically see the title commitment and a chain of title to see who owns the property.
Right.
But I totally agree with Steve Leto on this. It really is it's a mess because there's so many individuals, and you can blame everybody else. I'm glad that sense came to the point where hopefully the doctor was happy. Personally, I don't think everybody was happy in it.
There's no way.
There's too many working parts to it, but but people were probably saying, well, it's going to cost me more money to get an attorney, might as well just take the money and move on, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So but anyway, please like and subscribe. I appreciate. Give us a thumbs up.
I think that it's so interesting that this is happening so often, because at the beginning of the video he said that it's an increasing scam with fake sellers, people pretending to be fake sellers.
We've spoke about this before, haven't we?
We talked about it literally last week.
Yeah, we've spoke about this. There's people that literally are finding lots that have been vacant for a long time, and basically what they're doing is, deeds supposed to be done by attorneys, and what they're doing is getting deeds from Office Depot or these online services, and just taking them to the local county houses and getting them notarized and taken there.
Exactly. And they don't even have to be vacant. People can live in them. All they do is just see how long a house is for sale. Remember, we talked about it 2 weeks ago. There was a couple, their house had been for sale for 3-4 years, and the woman was like, oh, I thought the house was vacant, so I put the house in my name, which is crazy, because what do you mean?
She had no business putting that.
What was it, like a $3 million home or $4 million home, and she put it in her name? So it's just so if you own a home at this point and you are attempting to sell it, or if you own land at this point, it's going to be something where you have to check every 3 months to 6 months or so to make sure that everything is squared away on your property, to make sure that these types of things are not happening.
Yeah, but there are some services out there you can use. I use a company called Title Lock, and they basically, it's like an insurance, and they check all my titles.
Yeah.
And make sure that everything stays in my name.
Yeah, you have to be diligent right now. You have to be diligent with everything that you're doing. So just keep that in mind. If you do own a home and you're trying to sell it at all, just make sure that you are doing your own due diligence with that. So, yeah.
And the next point we're going to talk about is basically the US sues secret landlord cartel. I think this is pretty interesting. Why don't you go ahead and play the clip?
Moment. No matter who you are, it's become increasingly unaffordable, and rent is going crazy in so many different cities in so many different countries across the world. There have been protests in New York, in Spain, in Canada, and the UK, all around this idea of affordable housing. It's gotten so bad now that rent is actually unaffordable in the US for around half of all renters. Rents have been rising for the fastest rate in decades in the UK. Homelessness has also been rising along with these increasing rents. Some people blame Airbnb. Some people blame a lack of supply. Some people blame Wall Street. All of these different explanations are valid to a certain degree. A lack of supply, zoning codes, and corporate buyers are all reasons why housing is getting more expensive. But today I want to talk about this one company, RealPage. Arguably the worst company in the world. Didn't hear that from me. They present another dimension that helps to give you a fuller picture of the housing crisis. So RealPage describes itself as a provider of property management software, data analytics, and services to efficiently manage rental properties and real estate. But they are so much more than this, okay? They are so much more than this. If you have heard of this company, it's likely because they've been embroiled in a number of lawsuits. They settled $3 million in charges with the Federal Trade Commission. They've been sued time and time again. And the most recent lawsuit that they've been involved in has been brought forward by the Department of Justice in the USA, along with 8 individual states who've decided to join this lawsuit, accusing them of effectively running a housing cartel. specifically because of this one piece of software they have called the YieldStar. And YieldStar collects information from a bunch of different landlords, information about all the leases that they have going on in the building, the occupancy rates of their building, which units are empty, which units are full, and combines it with publicly available data. And it has the result, in their own words, of maximizing asset performance. That's what they describe it as. I'm sure you can figure out what that means. It just means it uses an algorithm to figure out whether or not they can get away with charging more. If you live in North America, Europe, or Asia, you might live in one of the 24 million units that's managed by RealPage. And there's a chance that your landlord is using this algorithm to effectively charge the absolute maximum possible and to collude with other landlords in order to do the same. In one analysis, they found that around 30 to 60% of apartment units in some American markets used RealPage to manage their properties. The largest property manager in the US is a company called Greystar, and they even found that by using this software, even in a downturn, their rentals outperformed the market by 4.8%. One executive from the company who operates this software was asked whether he believed the software had a role to play in housing prices. And this is what he answered.
We are seeing unprecedented rent growth, 14.5% growth, lease over lease on new leases. Never before have we seen these numbers. So Andrew, I'll start with you. What is the role of revenue management in some of the price growth we're seeing right now?
Well, I think it's driving it, quite honestly, because when you think about, as a property manager, very few of us would be willing to actually raise rents double digit within a single month by doing it manually. So that opportunity to actually review price systemically on a day-to-day basis with optimized rents is what's driving that growth, in my opinion.
There are a bunch of quotes like this where you read them and you ask yourself, like, do these people like hear what they're saying? Because this sounds like supervillain stuff. One of the developers of the algorithm actually said that it was conceived to solve the problem of leasing agents having too much empathy compared to computer generated pricing. And this software eliminated empathy from the equation of housing people. And I don't know if any of you have ever had to interact with like a leasing agent or like an estate agent, but empathy isn't the word I'd normally use to describe them. Some of the recommendations that come from this software are things like not filling every bit of housing that you have because it allows you to charge a higher rate on the other units. They also suggested that landlords adjust some people's leases to 13 months in order to reduce the overall supply throughout the year. If you want to see what the industry thinks of this, what these corporate landlords actually think of this software, Rick Campo, who is the CEO of Camden Property Trust, a company that owns more than 62,000 rental units, had this to say after adopting the software. The net effect of driving revenue and pushing people out was $10 million of income. I think that shows that keeping heads in the beds above all else is not always the best strategy. This is like Lex Luthor, like supervillain stuff. When he said this, he didn't think he was the bad guy until people found out he said this, and then he claimed that he totally didn't mean that pushing people out of their houses was a good idea. This is deplorable, obviously, but being an unethical company isn't enough to get you sued. And I think it's worth understanding exactly what they're being sued for, because they're not the only company who does this. So their number one competitor is a company called Yardi, that had a software that was literally called Rent Maximizer. This software was used to price 8 million units in 2013. So nobody at any point thought, maybe we should pick a different name. The real problem is that housing has become consolidated within fewer and fewer hands. Corporate landlords have been getting bigger and bigger year on year. And as these landlords get bigger and bigger, they hold more and more power over the market, especially in smaller areas and more isolated areas. And what these landlords have realized is that working together actually beats competing against each other. It's in everyone's best interest to collaborate and to share information rather than try to outcompete the competition. Unfortunately, this idea of working together with your competition is the literal definition of a cartel, an association of manufacturers or suppliers that collaborate instead of competing, with the sole purpose of maintaining prices at a high level and restricting competition. If we take a second to go over the actual lawsuit, you see there's some banger lines in this complaint. So the US is suing this company RealPage because it has an estimated 80% market share over this kind of revenue management software. And the government alleges that it's trying to monopolize the market and to unlawfully decrease competition amongst this housing market. This is a quote from a landlord who used RealPage, who used this software. He said, I always like this product because your algorithm uses proprietary data from other subscribers to suggest rents and terms. That's classic price fixing. It honestly baffles me that people like type this, they read it, and they're like, yeah, that sounds good, and hit send. Some other banger quotes include them saying that their software is driving every possible opportunity to increase price, and a rising tide raises all ships. The tide being an ever-increasing sea of money from renters. Yeah, that's pretty spot on. In this complaint, they make a reference to a quote that was given by Maureen Olhausen, who was a former chair of the FTC. And she gives us like a really handy way to think about what these algorithms are doing. Because when we think of a cartel, you might think of a shady group of businessmen meeting around a table, like an Illuminati type setup. But we live in the age of technology. And so there's no need for all of these independent operators to ever actually physically meet. They can collude via an algorithm. So she says, everywhere the word algorithm appears, please just insert a guy named Bob. Is it okay for a guy named Bob to collect confidential price strategy information from all the participants in a market and tell everyone how they should price? If it isn't okay for a guy named Bob to do it, then it probably isn't okay for an algorithm to do it either. If such a guy, this Bob existed, he'd be described as a mafia boss. That's what they did, right? It can feel maybe a bit impersonal, a bit abstract to describe this software as like increasing rents or whatever. But I think it becomes a bit more like visceral when you look at the effect on specific markets and specific places. And I do think that Seattle is a really good example of how this is literally affecting people's lives. ProPublica, the news outlet that has been reporting on this company for years, did an analysis of one neighborhood in Seattle and found out that 70% of apartments were overseen by 10 companies. And every single one of these companies used this software. 90% of increases are accepted. And they've even added like an auto accept feature. So the landlord doesn't even have to physically engage with the software. They just have to set it and forget it. It's all part of this effort to abstract away any kind of relationship between the landlord and between the tenant. Corporate landlords are clearly the problem, because they try harder and harder and harder to have a less and less and less personal relationship with the tenants. And, the less personal a relationship is, the less guilty you feel exploiting it. And I would struggle to argue that this is the only reason for housing increases. House prices have been going up for decades and decades across a number of different markets. But what I will say is that I'm not going to lose any sleep over this lawsuit, and that a company like this being targeted is just such a massive step in the right direction. It's so rare to see any kind of action directed towards these companies that exploit and abuse the process of renting. And so even seeing this one case is a good thing. And there actually has been progress in this space. I do want to highlight San Francisco, who recently became the first city in the US to ban the sale and the use of this kind of software within city limits. It is going to at least act as a dampener, and I can't be mad at this. The hidden side of software like this is that it plays into a bunch of other crises that are happening at the same time. A rental crisis isn't just a rental crisis, it's also a homelessness crisis. It's a drug epidemic. It's a quality of life decrease, and it has so many effects that knock on down the line that we don't think about. In the meantime, I will say, if you are a renter, I hope you have tipped your landlord today. They're carrying a lot of weight on their back, so, drop them a little extra 20. Let them get something nice for themselves.
That was a good and interesting video. The points that I want to make on that, we use one of them software, but the version that we got doesn't give us the rental analysis, because we do HOA management and regular management, so we just use one of their types. But what I'll say is, I don't think the algorithms should be shared between the different companies. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that's the problem that RealPage is doing, because what RealPage is doing is generating that algorithm, and then I think RealPage are providing feeds to them different companies. And that's what price fixing is, and I think it's a monopoly, because it's basically saying, well, for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, you should be getting X amount of dollars in that area, and no two properties are ever the same. Yeah. What are some of the comments from that?
So this is a comment that I wanted to have us highlight right here.
I moved to my apartment in 2016. Rent was $705 a month. The following year, the apartment changed to low-income housing, and rent rose to $950. I just got notice from my landlord that my rent will be raising to $1,680 in 2025. It is studio apartment that's less than 400 square feet. That is unbelievable.
That is terrible, and that should be illegal, because how much is that, a 40, or that's that's like a 70-80% increase on rent. That is absurd. So I feel very, very what's it called, very bad for that person. So, and then someone said
and you know what's bad about that as well? When it says low-income housing, I don't call $600 a month low-income housing.
Yeah, when it changed to low-income housing, they raised the rent to $950, which is crazy. And now in 2025, that doesn't make any sense.
So if you enjoyed that video, please like and subscribe. Give it a thumbs up.
Another comment says, I became a landlord. Very ironic, because I loathe landlordism. I inherited my grandmother's apartment in a tiny town. I didn't sell it yet due to some weird tax regulations, so it is rented to a single mom for a very low pay, no increase in years. She takes good care of the place. I feel good about not being scum, and maybe when I finally can sell, she might be able to buy. Financially, this is stupid because I'm not maximizing profit, but feeling like a human is worth more to me than an extra 100 euro. So,
and you know the thing that's, I mean, I've always thought that buying is better than renting, but it's just it's such a shame when people's rents are going up, exclusive, just ridiculous amounts, because then it doesn't let them. They've got to cut somewhere, they've got to cut the cloth somewhere else.
Exactly. And I think this comment right here is a good one. You want to read it, Stephen? The one that's highlighted.
The cost of, people say the cost of housing in the US has gone up, but the cost of housing in the UK has gone up. The standard of living, I think, has gone down in the UK compared to what it was.
So someone said it is calculated that the UK economy is 30% smaller than it would be due to the cost of housing. So.
Right.
So yeah, and then I think a comment right here is perfect for a lot of things that we say. So this one right here, Stephen. Number 1.
Ban corporations from owning single family to quadplex homes.
2.
Ban an entity from owning more than 5 rental properties in the single family to quadplex home category.
3.
Ban, it's too small for me to see.
Okay.
Ban, there you go. Ban software as described in the video that essentially creates price fixing. 4. Allow for taller apartment buildings. Many cities may have a height limit on buildings for aesthetic reasons. These are just some ideas that I think would help. They probably would help.
Especially the first 3.
But that's the problem. There's too many corporations that own in a particular area. So what they end up doing is controlling that particular market. But you see, you get around that. You then own 100 corporations.
Exactly.
And you buy homes in an area. So, you've got to bring in legislation that basically says, a particular person who owns a corporation can't. You've got to take it one step further.
Yeah, I think, man, it's just going to be very, very hard to, like you said.
Yeah, but there's attorneys out there that can sit down, I think, and put and Congress and the Senate, if they can get together,
Yeah, if people do their due diligence and they see, okay, well, Stephen Williams is on the board of 5 different corporations. He can't own this many houses.
Right.
He can only be in one.
The other part is that I do think, and I shout this out to everybody all the time, don't just go to Facebook on Craigslist and just look up apartments for sale, because one, you never know whether that person's actually the agent. The second thing is, don't bother going to apartments.com and all the others, because what basically happens, apartments.com I think is linked to this system. All right, it probably is. And then also I would always suggest that you find yourself a realtor to help you do the leasing, because a realtor can negotiate and can advise you. Like you said, the 13-month lease is one thing they're trying to do, increase their by, was it 10 million? A realtor will tell you, no, do 12 months.
Right.
So I always suggest, go get yourself a realtor. They can advise you.
Yeah, so
It's worthwhile, even if you have to pay your realtor with the new rules and regs. Okay, we're going to finish up just with something that's a little bit touchy class, what I call. And this is a billionaire who purchased a property many years ago. And this is in France, in Versailles. It's a Versailles mansion. And can you believe the photos on this mansion?
It's beautiful. It looks like Bridgerton. Have you seen the show Bridgerton?
No, I haven't. I'm not into all of that old English stuff.
You don't like to see your old country?
I'm really not.
Yeah.
But basically, he spent 15 years building a cliffside Versailles mansion, and now he's listing it for $108 million.
Yeah.
But look at this. I mean,
let's take a look at these photos.
It'd probably be something like Tom Cruise would buy or something like that.
Yeah.
Or
13,000 square feet.
What's that?
13,000 square foot.
Or maybe Lewis Hamilton would buy it or something. I don't know.
Beyonce would probably buy this. It's gold. Her whole thing about her is gold.
I mean, it's beautiful. If you look at it and you scroll down through all these photos, it is all beautiful.
This is a stunning home. So.
How much do you think it would cost to maintain that?
I don't know.
I mean, you've got cleaners and pool cleaners and all the other stuff.
You got the pool cleaners.
But there again, if you've got that sort of money, why would you want to worry about that?
True, that's fair. There are people who, like there's mansions where they won't allow you to wear shoes inside of the mansion. Like if you rent it out, you're not allowed to wear shoes inside of them.
But if you owned a house like that, would you let people rent it out?
No, but people do. Like in Houston, people rent out their mansions out, and they're like, you can't wear shoes in the house. If you do, they have like the shoe covers and stuff, so you're not tracking anything in. And they're like,
when my wife recently went to Norway, when you go into the restaurants, that's what they have, because she was in the countryside, and they get them like blue covers. You got to put them on your boots.
Exactly.
And then you can go in the restaurant.
Yeah, that's exactly what they have in these mansions. So.
Yeah, she's recently wanted to go see the Northern Lights.
Did she get to see any?
She did.
Oh,
she did.
Awesome.
She had a great time.
That's great.
I've told her if you want to go every year, you can go every year. I'm staying home looking after the dogs. Anyway, I guess that's it for another week at the...
That's all we have.
The Texas Real Estate Show.
We're going to leave you guys wanting to be able to afford this $108 million.
That's right. You can work out how you can save up, so... Maybe we can all chip in and buy a little bit of it, and Anyway, please like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Thanks for tuning in. We've really enjoyed you, and thanks for the support. We've noticed our numbers are going up, which we're very, very excited about. I want a big, hand out to Kay for that, for all the work she's put into the channel. We appreciate you. We love you loads. Please leave comments in the chat. And we look forward to hearing from you. So until next week, ta-da for now.